The girl the universe forgot. The Mandela effect. That phrase never meant anything to me. Spooky, I guess, but it wasn't something I thought about for more than 5 minutes. I mean, honestly, until college I didn't even know what it was. I'm not one of the conspiracy theories, the ghost stories, or anything like that. So what would you expect? I wish I was still ignorant. It all began in my life science class. I was 20 at the time, and it was pretty close to the end of the fall semester at FSU. My professor, Dr. Arnold, had given us our finals early because she had a heart and didn't want us to be studying for everything at once. She figured doing our finals before everybody else's gave us time to study hers without any distraction, and then gave us time to study everybody else's with a little less stress. I loved her for that. But part of me wishes she never had decided to bless us that way. On the last day of class, most people skipped. Everybody knew we weren't really doing anything, and everybody just wanted to be done for the semester. Still, some of us were bound by the attendance policies of our scholarships, and others, just out of courtesy to Dr. Arnold, showed up. I personally was present because I loved the class. 1 more hour and 15 minutes of a teaching was a win for me, and hell, I had nothing better to do. She began the class slightly different than she usually did. We often start out with a current event from earlier in the week. Something about GMOs, the dramatically declining population of giraffes, or something else relating to the life of science. But today, we looked up an older article, and something far more related to biology. It was about the Mandela effect. I never heard of it before. Most of us hadn't, but she was passionate about it. The old lady was usually pretty springly while teaching, choleric when somebody was disagreeing with her, but man, today she was ecstatic. Alright, to those of you considerate enough to show up to my class today, I have a treat for you. I'm going to teach you all about something that you'll probably never forget. Or maybe you'll blow it off, I don't know. But if this intrigues you like it did to me, I'm sure you'll be happy you arrived. Can somebody tell me when Nelson Mandela died? Everyone looked around confusedly. Then a girl raised her hand. He died a couple of years ago? 2012, I think. She slowly nodded, studying the class like she was waiting for something. And she found that something. Seagrave. She pointed at the boy in the class. Why the confused face? Well, I thought he died, like, a while ago? The 19th or something in prison. She beamed with delight. Well, class, is Amanda right or Cole? Everyone seemed conflicted. Most of us like me and honestly had no clue. But a couple people agreed with Cole, and one other person agreed with Amanda. Amanda, Dr. Arnold commanded, you're closer to correct. He died from a respiratory tract infection on December 5th, 2013. But why did some of you think he died in prison in the early 19th then? Several of you thought that, but She mentioned one of the guys to explain. Where'd you come to that conclusion? I could swear we learned that in 7th grade. In my world history class? It was part of Black History Month. Yeah, same here, one of the girls nodded. Black History Month when I was a kid. He died and then there was this thing about his wife trying to sue some company? Exemplary. Dr. Arnold was more complaised than I'd ever seen her. You all remember all this being said? Except, strangely enough, it never was. None of this was ever said. Look it up. Go Google and search Nelson Mandela death. You'll find nothing about the 90s or a prison. For that matter, type in Nelson Mandela prison death. You won't find a CNN article or documentary about his funeral, which was televised all over the globe. You won't find his proposed cause of death, and you'll find nothing about the riots in South Africa cities afterward, because none of it happened. This left me a little weirded out. Most of the class was silent now, and waiting for her to make sense of it. It's a phenomenon known as the Mandela effect, she grinned. A complete mystery. Enigmatic, anomaly on Earth with no scientific explanation. And from that point, an hour and 15 minutes flew by. I thought 5 minutes had elapsed when it was time to be dismissed. It left me absolutely mind-boggled. Basically, it's this theory that Nelson Mandela did die in a prison in the 90s. But then, something happened that somehow reversed this event. And he went on to live decades longer, before dying again in 2013. Though some of us don't remember Mandela dying in the 20th century, others do. They remember the news coverage, the papers, the heartfelt speeches from his widow, but all of it vanished from the earth when this event took place and rewrote history. And all that is left is this huge collective memory. These people that know he died like this, and all remember the same thing, somehow. But it's wrong. Personally, I don't remember being told Mandela died in the 90s. But a lot of people did, and do. There are two theories behind it. The first and less common one is time travel. They say that people went back in time and altered the event, just slightly. But it created a ripple effect that resulted in something changing dramatically. Here's a made-up example. Bob married Sally. Bob and Sally met downtown, sometime back in August of 2005. Bob's dog just got run over and he's grieving. And when he saw Sally walking her dog, he couldn't help but walk over and talk to her. For long, they were in love and married. Well, then, Jake goes back in time to the same town in the same time. Jake driving on the road about the same time Bob's dog got run over. But since Jake's driving, and he's in front of the car that hits Bob's dog, and since Jake is a better driver, he comes to a halt and never hits it. The dog runs back over to Bob completely fine. So, now when Bob goes downtown, he doesn't think twice when he sees Sally walking her dog. And they never say a word to each other. They each get married to somebody else, and now their son, who could have cured cancer or something, never exists. But time travel is believed to be entirely fictional and improbable. The more common theory is that there are several universes, all alternate, and that's something they rub shoulders or essentially cross paths, like two cars in really minor accident, a finer bender. Universe A rear ends Universe B, and almost everything is the same, except Universe A needs a new bumper. Well, in literal terms. Now something between Universe A and Universe B is swapped. Nelson Mandela lived to 2013 and died of a respiratory tract infection and not in prison in the 90s. And now, everybody in the Universe B thought he died from a lung infection instead of the African jail. This once is a commonly believed one. After Dr. Arnold's class, I looked more into it. And there are other kinds of examples too. Take the Berenstain Bears, for example. We all read those books as a kid, or at least our parents read them to us. Well, without looking, How was their name spelled? Berenstein? Berenstain? Which one? If you said Berenstein, you're one of thousands of others that would bet the house you're right. But you're wrong. It was never spelled that way. And what about Curious George? Did he have a tail? What position is the thinker making? If he fits pressed against his head? Or is his hand not even balled up? Slumped into his cheek, his fingers extending all the way to his chest? Curious George does not have a tail, and the thinker is doing a lauded position. These things may seem silly, but if they're wrong, why do so many people believe them to be true? Personally, I have my own theory about Berenstein's beers and Curious George. When you read the name Berenstein, it looks Jewish or German. Unlike many Jewish or German surnames, you think it is ending in Stein instead of Stain. Take for an instance, Goldstein, Perlstein, hell, Einstein. We all know that name. Berenstain just doesn't look right. And over time our minds filled the A with an E. Same with Curious George. He's a monkey, for God's sake. Of course we think he had a tail. He's even commonly portrayed hanging from a vine, with his head down and his butt up in the air, as if he's hanging from his tail. These are more like the power of suggestion. Through external factors, our memory of simple things were altered. But then you have the thinker, King Tut's burial mask, and Nelson Mandela, of course. If the thinker really is posing with his hand in a relaxed, non-cold flat motion, pressed against his cheek, which is folding over his knuckles, why do we remember his hand completely balled up and resting against his head? And not just us, but popular cartoons depict it this way as well. Why do so many people make this mistake? And King Tut's burial mask, what is on top of the mask, right between the eyes? There's a figure depicted there, an animal, to be more specific. And for those of you who thought, snake, duh, you're like me, but you're wrong, at least partly. There is a snake and a bird that looks so outlandish and unnatural on the mask that I can't even look at it without shaking my head. There couldn't have been two animals. That looks ridiculous. Look it up on Google and see for yourself. I remember in 6th grade, I had a world history textbook with that burial mask on the cover. I looked at that thing every damn day. Hell, when I was nodding in class. That's when my eyes fell down onto the cover of that book, which was sitting on my desk. I never saw that bird. I thought that maybe I could have just been the angle, but the bird sticks out so far that there's no way you can't see it, unless the mask was sent completely away from you, which it never is, and if it was, you wouldn't have been able to see the snake either. I'm not the only one that remembers it looking like this. Popular cartoons draw it wrong all the time too. But there is always a bird on a thing. Since 1323 before Christus. Well, enough of my rambling. You might be wondering what all this has to do with me. See, after Dr. Arnold's class today, I couldn't get this out of my head. I was so spooked out by it. So morally intrigued. That just occupied my thoughts. I felt victim to it. But still, it wasn't some grand epiphany of mine, some life-changing philosophy. After all, I was too busy studying for my exams to ponder it that often. But all of that changed when I sat down with my friend Asha a week later for breakfast. Asha and I had been friends since 1st grade. We met in Tower City, Christian academy in Michigan, in a town with a population of less than 10,000. It was always freezing there, dreary and grey and silent. You could see the whole town from a 5-story building. There were miles and miles of abandoned cornfields, and the only real moneymaker in the town was its small harbour, at which fishing occurred. I discovered later on that apparently in other countries, Tawas City, Michigan is known as the bird-watching capital of the world. Purportedly, a vast area of bird species migrate there, and it's great for bird watching. I never noticed that. All I can remember is the snowy grey skies, the silent cornfields, and the feeling that if the place was wiped off the face of the earth, no one would notice it. Naturally, the public school was puny, but the private school, it hardly existed. In my class there were 15 of us, 16 including the teacher. So I thought, I am starving, man. Ashes sighed, walking ahead of me into the diner. It was early on a Saturday morning. It was the last week of the semester, and we'd been studying like crazy. We figured our day would be spent doing the same thing as usual, an amalgamation of studying endlessly and resisting the urge to buy Adderall, which was pretty prominent on the campus around the time. But my day didn't consist of all of that. We sat down at the usual booth. Ash's hair as red and messy as usual. He was a ginger, and a mischievous one at that. He was a prankster, and barely passed his classes. He was there for the booze and the girls, and his grades reflected it. But as friends do, I forced him to study and pass. Still, breakfast was school-free zone. All mention of classes and tests were off limits at diner. Here, we wanted to rid our minds of it all. The last time we met up, I went on and on about the Mandela effect, to the point he wanted to shove scissors into his ears. So I tried not to mention it today. I am telling you, man, he sipped his coffee. When this is over, we're partying like crazy. Like crazy, scene. I don't want to remember where I am when I wake up that morning. I chuckled. Yeah, man, for sure. Don't you sometimes wish we were back at Tawas Christian? I mean, not back in Tawas City, but just the classes? We thought they were so hard. We both laughed. God, we were wrong. Yeah, that was a whole different universe, bro. Shit was so easy compared to now. And there were only 14 of us in total, unless you include Miss Davis, which is fucking crazy. 14? I think it was 15, man. He looked confused. Nah, bro, 14. Me, you, Aaron Engels, Taylor Mahoney, Zach O'Toole, that quiet girl named Grayson, Elizabeth, Norman, that's one kid, I don't remember his real name, but we all called him Taz. Because he talked so fast, nobody could hear what the fuck he was saying. I chuckled as I remembered him. There was Brian Reed, Amy, the twins George and Jordan Reynolds, and the one nerdy kid, Dylan. And then Miss Davis. That's 15 including her. And Eve. He squinted his eyes. Who? Eve, the shy girl, remember? Short, blonde, brown eyes. Didn't talk to anybody. He shook his head. That was it, man. There were 14 of us. No, dude, I replied. That was Eve. I've been waiting for you to name her the whole time. He just looked at me like I was telling him bread was liquid. Asher, are you messing with me? Stop, dude. I'm not messing with you. That just wasn't an Eve. I distractedly remember 14 of us. Remember 4 girls, 10 guys. No, I shook my head. 5 girls, 10 guys. That's how it was. Her name was Eve. She didn't talk to anybody, and we both never said anything to her. You're messing with me and this isn't funny. I started to feel panicked. I've been reading all that shit about the Mandela effect, and now you're trying to freak me out. Come on, stop it, man. Now he looked frustrated. Stop with that Mandela shit. There's no Eve, you're sleep deprived. What? I was getting annoyed, but also terrified. All this hysteria I'd embraced lately. As I considered if the Mandela effect could be real, left me feeling hopelessly crazy as Asha argued with me. I knew there was an Eve. She went to Tawas Christian with us. Her face was so easy for me to recreate in my mind. Seen? He looked at me intently. Are you fucking with me? No, I replied, trying not to sound panicked. It was such a simple situation. Asha just forgetting about her. It was over a decade ago, and she wasn't by any means a notable student. She shied away from conversations, sitting in the back of the room with nothing to say. She only talked when forced to by Miss Davis, and none of us struck up conversation with her. Bro, you're just forgetting about her. She was quiet, man, like really quiet. First grade was a long damn time ago. Maybe, he shrugged. Honestly though, no, it can't be. It can't be. I remember that class easily. There were 14 of us. You must be thinking about something else. Don't tell me I'm thinking about something else. I felt hopeless. What the hell was that? He glared at me. Man, this isn't funny. You know that Mandela shit's been freaking me out. Please, Asha, stop. I pleaded. He looked horrified. Seen? I am not fucking with you. Why? You getting so worried, bro? Eh. He slid me a coffee. Just relax, man. Relax. It's not a big deal. You're fine. She was right with us. Asha, remember reading group? There were 15 of us. There were 5 of us in each group. Eve was in my group. No, man, I mean, you're right about there being 5 in each group. But Miss Davis was in the group, remember? No! She walked around and supervised, I argued. Asha, Eve was in my group. I know she was. Because every time she was forced to read, she'd choke up and not say anything. And the few times she did read, I was always enamored to actually be hearing her voice. Because I never did. Like, no one did. Asha was still and silent. Both of us knew what we knew. But one of us was wrong, right? Dude, I begged. Her car, remember that at least. Her mom dressed nicely, in a dress, always. She come to pick Eve up in a fancy black car. I never gave a shit about cars, and I still don't. In my senior year of high school, I thought that Altima was a car make. I couldn't tell the difference between Porsche and Honda, but I remember her car because it was so nice looking. It was probably a Cadillac or something. Come on, man! We used to always think it looked cool when it came into the pickup loop. Her mom was the first to arrive every day, and Eve would get up quickly from her lone corner on a bench and trudge over to the car. And her mom would come out, dressed nicely, even if it was snowing, and hugged her. every single time. And she always smelled nice because her mom hugged her. Every morning too, and got her perfume on her. Now Asher actually looked worried. Seen? He shook his head. I don't remember her. I'd say you're thinking of someone else from another school, but we've gone to the same school since 1st grade, and I don't remember her. Ever! Maybe it was someone you met in preschool? No, we both talked about her. She was in my reading circle in Mrs. Davis' class. What about after that? You're only talking about 1st grade. I don't remember her after that. She must have moved, but she was in 1st grade. That's probably why you forgot her. She moved and you just remember all of us that graduated 5th grade there. No, man. I remember 1st grade too. She wasn't there. Miss Davis was my favorite teacher. I remember that year easily. There wasn't a girl named Eve. I don't really know why, but I felt like crying. Imagine that all your life you never believed in ghosts. Then you see this horror movie or something, and there's a scene where the main character is looking in a mirror, and then his reflection stops following him and does its own thing, and it's horrifying. After that, you just keep thinking about that scene, because it scared you that much. But hey, it's just a horror movie, it's not real, and that's the only thing keeping you from never looking into mirrors again. But then you figure out the movie is based on a true story. Okay, anybody could say that. It's based on a true story, like all horror movies. Just because it could be true doesn't mean it is. Nothing's hitting close to home. And then it happens to you. You're getting out of the shower, you're drying off, and you happen to look into a mirror. You raise your towel to dry off your hair, and when your reflection comes into view, its arms are at your side, and it's staring at you. Holy shit. You're terrified. It's real. It happened to you, and there's no denying it. That's how I felt at the table. Maybe it wasn't as concrete, but I knew Eve was in that class. I remembered her, like the back of my hand, but Asher didn't. Not at all. It was like the bed on King Tut's burial mask, like the thinkest flimsy hand stretching the skin of his cheek, like the absent footage of Nelson Mandela's huge funeral in the early 90s. I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. For the rest of the day I didn't study anything. I was too overwhelmed. I tried my hardest to assimilate Eve into my preschool memory, but she was incompatible. She didn't fit. She didn't fit my old church. She didn't fit in my neighbors growing up. She didn't fit anywhere but Miss Davis' 1st grade class. Finally, that night, I called my mother on the phone. At this point, I wasn't entirely convinced I was witnessing the Mandela effect. Some part of me figured Asher just smoked too much reefer in high school and forgot about her. And I knew how to find out if I was right. I told my mom that she wouldn't hear much from me this week because all of the studying I've been doing, which she totally respected. So she was pretty surprised when I called her. Hey, Scene! She sounded excited. What's up? Hey, Mom! I wanted to ask you something. Do you remember a girl named Eve in Mrs. Davis' class? A short blonde girl with brown eyes? That's a random question, she replied. No. Doesn't ring a bell. On your 7th birthday you invited over all the kids, but I don't remember an Eve. Yeah, I invited her, but she didn't come, I remember. She was really shy. That's probably why you forgot her. Well, I have some pictures of you in 1st grade. I could send them to you and you could point her out to me, if you see her in them. Why are you asking anyway? Well, Asher doesn't remember her either. It's just weirded me out a little bit. I chuckled, trying to hide my nervousness. Yeah, it'd be cool if you send us pictures. Do you have the one of the whole class? The one with all 14 of you. The words left me severely uncomfortable. 15. There were 15 of us, Mom. No, 14 I thought. What the fuck? I whispered. Mom, yeah, just send me the pictures if you can. Okay, is everything okay, Scene? Just feeling weird. It's weird nobody remembers her. I don't have the class picture, she sighed. I wish I did. Asher's mom might. See if Asher can get it from her, but I sent you the ones I have. Okay, thanks, Mom. We talked a bit longer after that, but my mind wasn't occupied by the conversation. All I could think about was Eve. I could remember her short body, her perfect posture, the quaint dresses she wore to class. I could remember her scent that to this day still appeared sometime in supermarkets or in a lecture hall for a fading second, just long enough to remind me of first grade. I could remember her voice when she finally worked up the courage to read in a reading circle. I remembered everything about her. I knew I'd be able to point her out if she showed up in any of the pictures. Still, what bothered me was this. The Mandela effect is a smooth criminal. It's articulate, pinpoint exact. It never leaves no trace behind. Here's what I mean. The thinker, for an instant. A lot of people remember taking pictures with it. They know the thinker didn't look the way it does now when they look at the picture. So, they go back and find their old vacation album, brushing the dust off a recurrent finding, then posting with the ex-wife before the statue. And all the work and awkwardness of thumbing through the old album was for nothing, because in the picture, the thinker is doing exactly what they remember it wasn't doing. Even weirder as the pictures that went viral of people standing right in front of the statue, posing with a fist against their head. They're in front of the damn thing. Don't you think they maybe noticed it wasn't doing what they thought they were doing, and not pose incorrectly in front of it? But maybe they're not complete idiots, or just downright oblivious. Maybe when they took that picture, it was pressing its fist against the skull, and then, when the Mandela effect occurred at some untraceable exact moment in time, the picture changed, but only the statue, and left everything else that wasn't the statue the same, resulting in a bizarre image of people posing incorrectly right in front of it. I knew that if this was the Mandela effect I was dealing with, there'd be no point at all to receive these pictures. Whether or not Eve was standing there, where the pictures was taken 13 years ago, she wouldn't show up in them. The only way to catch the Mandela effect is through related things, like the people posing wrong in front of a statue, and this wasn't relative. If the universe spilled Eve from existence, then she wouldn't be present in any of the Polaroids. But I wanted to check anyways. Maybe something would stand out. My mom sent 4 pictures. The first was of me, Asher, Brian, Reed, Taz, and Norman, playing at aftercare one day in the mud. The second wasn't used for either. Just me and Asher, sitting at a picnic table one night at open house. The third picture, however, was interesting. It was of the Christmas concert. All 15 of us were taught 3 church songs to sing at the concert that our parents came and watched. It was humiliating for all of us. except maybe Aaron, who was born to be a star. But it was especially embarrassing for Eve. This photo jogged my memory immediately, and what made it so strange was the formation of the girls. In the picture, you could see all of us on stage. There was one riser on stage, and some of us were standing on it, while the others were standing in front of the stage itself. On the left side are the boys, 5 in front, 5 on the riser. And the right are the girls, 3 in front and 1 on the riser. Between 2 of the girls, it looks like somebody's missing in the picture. You have Erin on the left, then Amy next to her, then Elizabeth next to her. And then Grayson is standing on the rise between Erin and Amy. Eve would fit perfectly between Amy and Elizabeth. Perfectly. Why the hell would they put 3 girls on the stage and 1 girl alone on the riser, asymmetrically? Especially when the boys are lined up perfectly. It made no damn sense. And I remember Eve there that night, how scared she was. I remember her white dress, and thinking, for once, we were all dressed like her, and she didn't stand out. And I remember her crying backstage, and being scared to death to go out, and not singing the entire time but just freezing up. I'd bet my soul that that happened. The final picture was also useless. Just me, Brian Reed, in kickball game that we played on the last day of school. Brian Reed was trying to pack me out and running like a madman for the first base. I saved the picture of a Christmas concert onto my phone. It was just a proof I needed to show Asher. The next day, when I ran into Asher, I showed him the picture. To my surprise, it actually affected him. He seemed nervous when he started to consider how weird the picture looked. He told me that if I had mentioned Eve now, after he had seen the picture, he would have thought it was a coincidence. But since I mentioned Eve before either of us had seen it, that made it look stranger. Still, he wasn't ready to believe in the Mandela effect, not like I was. But he was curious enough to ask his mother if she had our class picture. She did. Both of us waited anxiously for her to send it. I could remember anything about the picture. Still, I wanted to see if there was a strange placement of the students like the Christmas concert. And so did Asha. When she got the message, both of us were shaking with anxiousness. The moment I saw it, I gasped. "Remember," I jumped, "the bee sting." "Huh?" Asher flinched, startled by my screaming. "Asher!" I grabbed him. "See how we're standing like that? It was because of Eve." Miss David stood in the middle of us, 7 of us on her left and 7 of us on the right. Those on her left were turned slightly to face her, thus the left side of their faces was shown and the right side were blocked, and those on the right were turned leftward, so the right was facing the photographer. What stood out was an ample negative space in the picture. When groups pose in this fashion, it's a way to shrink the size of the group. Usually, the cameraman has trouble fitting off the people in a shot, and thus they form this way so they can all scrunch up and fit, but still look natural. But in this picture, it's easy to see that we had more than enough room to stand correctly and still fit. That wasn't the reason we stood that way. Asher! I felt as if struck in gold. We're all posed like that cause Eve got stung by a bee. Dude, tell me you remember. We were going to take the picture and she got stung right underneath her right eye. Her face got all swollen and she was crying because she didn't want to look like that in the picture. So the photographer said to pose like this, and Eve could turn the left side of her face to the camera. Dude, Asher scratched his head. We just posed like this so we could save room. No, we didn't. There's no reason to do that. There's too much room on the left and right side. It's unnatural even. We wouldn't have done it for that reason. I don't remember anything like that happening, man. Honestly, this is starting to weird me out. I think we just forget about it. I can't forget about it, I replied. She was real. I can't believe nobody can remember her. There was only one option left for me to do. I had to have a reunion with them. If we all met up and others of us remembered Eve, I know I wasn't crazy. Most of us hadn't spoken in years. Still, had Erin as my friend on Facebook. She talked all the time about having a reunion, now that we were in our 20s. And I knew if I mentioned it, she ruthlessly tried to put it together. I contacted her that night and she was completely on board. All of us were about to be free from college and winter break, and I suggested we'd meet back in Tower City. I was going down there away to see my family for Christmas. My mom had long suggested I throw a reunion at the house. She said she'd be honored to host and cater it. When I told Erin about this, she couldn't be more complained. She assured me she'd contact the others. All 15, she said. My heart raced. I asked, all 15? Yeah, she responded. All 15 of us, and Miss Davis. And at that moment, I felt another sense of dread. Erin always tried to keep the group together. Her forgetting Eve meant something was seriously wrong. When December 18 arrived, I was shocked to pull into my old driveway. I hadn't been there in years. Usually on Christmas, they came down to Tallahassee to visit me. It wasn't anything against them, I just hated Tower City. Around Christmas time it was freezing cold, and most of its residents went south for the winter, if they could afford it. It was a ghost town, and it's frigid one at that. My parents had picked me up from the airport and had driven me there. The entire way, I reminisced as we passed through the frozen over cornfields under the bleak white sky. I felt like I had been here yesterday. Nothing was different. It was all completely recognizable. Perhaps the only difference was some old building looked somehow even older, even more decrepit and abandoned. Throughout the drive, and especially when I got back to my house before anyone else arrived, really all I could think about was Eve. I felt closer to her in this ominous forgotten town, back entranced in the snow, something I hadn't felt in years. I sensed that she was in arm's reach for me. I knew that if I were to find closure, it'd be this reunion. If just one other person remembered her, then I wasn't crazy. Then the Mandela effect was real, and Eve was real, and Asher was wrong. God, I prayed for closure. At 4 o'clock, all of us could make it, and arrived. Miss Davis was unfortunately busy with her family, as her father was dying, and they didn't know how much time he had left. And Norman was completely untraceable. The last of us to hear from was Brian Reed, who remembered Norman was getting into trouble sometime around 8th grade and going into juvenile detention. After that, he pretty much vanished. Not like Eve though. He was still in the pictures. They still remembered his name. When the other 12 showed up at the house, I forgot about Eve just for a moment. Seeing Erin again was awesome. She was beautiful and energetic as always. Her long brown hair was styled maturely, and the vibrant green eyes, now only wiser. Tyler Mahoney was only just as handsome as he had always been. The stud was still dressed to kill, even in the freezing weather. Brian Reed had joined the Navy and was on liberty. He was even bigger now than he was then, and was engaged to his girlfriend since high school. Grace, on the other hand, was not favored by time. She looked older than she was, remained far shorter than most of us, and her face was covered in acne. Still, she was a lot more outgoing than any of us could remember. Zack looked like how I remembered. Tall, skinny. The only difference was now he had a mustache. He worked at Home Depot ever since high school, and was still living with his parents and moved to Minnesota. Amy was unrecognizable. She had bright blue hair now, which wasn't necessarily a surprise considering how rebellious she was growing up. But the piercings were unprecedented. Elizabeth was much like she had always been, generally quiet and sweet, with her alluring amber eyes that nobody could forget. Dylan didn't look that way. Any of us thought he would. He now was ravishing, tall, and wore rich stubble along his grand face. He still wore glasses, and I'm glad. Contacts on Dylan would have been staggering. He had a higher GPA, and even Erin, and all of us were proud of him. George and Jordan both looked a lot different now. George was a construction worker and was really and stout. Jordan, on the other hand, was more reversed, and amusingly taller than his twin brother George. Jordan's hair was neat and short. George's hair was a thick mass of black curls. They didn't even speak the same anymore. George spoke profoundly, and Jordan seemed to be a stranger to vulgarities. It was intriguing to see them so different. Taz was just as goofy as ever. To our surprise, he had been going to college and was working on a business degree. But when he talked about something he was passionate about, you couldn't understand a word he was saying. The moment he stepped inside, he blabbered on and on and on, and all we could do was laugh. He was just as crazy as ever. Asha and I believed to look the same. Ash's hair was still red, mine still brown. His eyes were still green, mine blue. His face still freckly, mine spoof. He was still a prankster and I was still quiet most of the time. The only difference was both of us were more shape, since we started running together. But the complex joy of seeing all of my friends again only distracted me for a short while. Before long my thoughts went back to Eve. I waited for her to come into the door, but I knew she never would. I waited for somebody to mention her, but I knew it would not happen. But Miss Davis and Norman accounted for. Everyone was there. It disheartened me, to say the least. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I read too much about the Mandela effect, and that bee sting thing was just the power of suggestion. And that Christmas concert picture was just weird. Maybe I dreamed of Eve once, and she was in my preschool, and I just screwed it all up in my head. There was no way to be sure. After dinner, we all went into the living room and talked. I tried to enjoy myself, but something other felt wrong. Eve should have been here. It bothered me so much that no one asked about her, and I knew I had to bring her up. But I didn't want to look crazy. Asha had asked me not to mention her, and I didn't want to annoy him. I also wasn't prepared to hear them tell me they remembered her. What would I do then? I wouldn't be delusional, but then what? The horror of trying to accept what became of her? That would be too close to impossible. I wanted so badly to hear from someone that she was real, but I didn't know how I'd ever forget her. If I had to really imagine the universe forgetting her, bumping shoulders with some alternate universe and ripping her from the snowstorms of Tower City to some other place light years away, most of it looking the same, with the exception of a few things, was just eerily different. I wanted to stay quiet. I wanted just to forget about her, but I knew that wasn't an option. I didn't know what was more disturbing to me. The Mandela effect happening so close home in my life. Or me being this delusional. Either way, I had to know. I could hold it no longer. Hey, guys? I spoke nervously. I need to ask you all a question. Asher looked disappointed. What's up, Scene? Brian Reed asked. Look, this might sound, weird, but where's Eve? I was thinking that the whole time. Tyler Mahoney spoke up, and my heart stopped. I wasn't crazy. Somebody else remembered her. And no one else did. There was confused silence devouring the room now. Asher looked as if he had seen a ghost. I myself was horrified at the same time, overwhelmed with relief. Eve? Aaron asked. Eve who? I don't remember her last name, Tyler replied. Quiet, short, blonde chick, wore a dress all the time. Holy shit, Asher muttered, bewildered. Holy shit. Am I missing something? Amy asked. There was a girl named Eve in her first class, I spoke up. But nobody remembers her. At least I thought nobody did. I chuckled nervously. But Tyler, you do. Man, I thought I lost my fucking mind. She's not in any of the pictures, but a damn one. There is no sign of her existing except of my memories. And I swear to God, I thought I'd gone off to the deep end, but Tyler, you remember her too. That brings so much closure. There was no Eve, Dylan responded. I don't recall an Eve. I remember each of you distinctly. I can't imagine how I would have forgotten one of you completely, and yet vividly remember the rest of you. I agree, Jordan chimed in. There were 4 girls, I remembered it easily. There wasn't a 5th. Yeah, there was, Tyler replied, which gave me so much peace. I had a crush on her, remember? Not to sound like a douchebag, but all you girls liked me. He faced them, and none could deny it. But then I had a crush on Eve and... The note! I burst into uproarious laughter, recalling it instantly. Yeah! Tyler laughed. The room was spontaneously silent. I liked Eve, Tyler chuckled. Nobody knew why I liked her because she was silent and standoffish, but I just fell for her. So I wrote her this super corny, embarrassing note and I went to hand it to her. And you got caught, I finished, just waiting to see it all line up together. And Mrs. Davis confiscated it, and everybody else wanted to know what it said because when she read it, she started laughing her head off. And it was the most embarrassing day in my life, he grinned. You guys don't remember? Most of them looked uncomfortable. I don't remember an Eve, Elizabeth spoke with certainty. Never do I remember that name. I don't remember the day you were talking about, and we all certainly did use to snicker about you. She smiled but looked troubled. All of us girls. I think we'd remember that. It happened, Tyler shrugged. How would Scene and I remember the same thing? Exactly the same thing. And it not really happen. And how would everyone remember the thinker's finger, balled in a confident fist, and while they were, in fact, fiercely poking his chest? And how would everyone remember King Tutankhamun's burial mask, with its lone snake at its crowning feature, when all along there was a lucid, brightly constructed bird immediately beside it? And how would everyone remember Nelson Mandela's immediate fate in a downtrodden Southern American prison, resulting in a monstrous civil unrest? Vividly recorded footage of his ubiquitously Ed's funeral, and a tear-jerking lamentable delivered by his widow in a passing, when all of it never fucking happened. It's because something disturbing and unthinkable occurred, something that none of us will ever explain happened, accumulating the thinker's result stoicism to a pose of deep uncertainty, producing the unnatural bird-like and black hat on King Tut's burial mask, and turning Nelson Mandela's into a zombie who lived unnatural until he passed away again in 2013, leaving those of us remembering differently absolutely baffled. Well, that's just really weird. Erin's words were like Catherine's the room looked for. No matter what Eve's existence or lack thereof meant, none could disagree that it was, in fact, just really weird. We changed the subject afterward, and most of us seemed to move or rather quickly from the enigma, but I didn't. It bothered me the entire time, gnawing at me. I wanted to sit and talk with Tyler and Eve all night. I wanted to hear all the stories about her that he remembered. I was dying to ask him if he recollected the bee sting story, but it just never came up. I couldn't ask it. I didn't want to visit it anymore. I did something to me that I couldn't explain to imagine that little girl being stung in the eye, crying before picture day in our snowy empty town. The memory alone was enough to make me tremble. That poor girl, showing her left side of her chubby face to the camera. Where was she now? What could anyone remember? I did my best to just forget. But Eve was stuck in my head. I knew I never forgot about her. The Mandela effect was real. She really did exist once. And now she didn't. What the hell happened to her then? I mean, really, it was just too terrifying to think about. And I couldn't forget, no matter how desperately I tried. Asha seemed to be in my boat. Most of them stayed the night in my house, since there wasn't a motel in the entire town, and the majority of our parents had moved. The next day everyone was out of town except me, having flown back to the land of the living. Only I stayed behind in the snowy scarred wasteland of Tower City, Michigan. Only I remained in this hot spot of the universe, the place where two realities collided. I didn't receive the closure I wanted from the reunion. We all exchanged numbers, and were staying in touch now, which was great. But more than anything, I was constantly bombarded by thoughts of Eve. I just want something to make sense. I stayed awake at night, thinking about a voice that I could so simply recall, reading to us, "There is a bird in your head," on Mac's words. I remembered her, so scared of the social events and huddling through the snow, still wearing a dress, though annulled with mittens and a scarf, toward her loving mother, where they hug outside in a fancy black car. I remember Eve's crying when the bee stung her eye. The memory from some bothered me more than the others. It just affected me. Something about it really cut me deep. She was so innocent and I felt so bad for her. And now she wasn't the victim of the simple bee sting, but some horrible cosmic event, leaving her non-existent. My parents wanted me to stick around until Christmas, but the thought of that killed me. I didn't want to stay in this wasteland for a week. I hated it, and now I was scared to death here. Would I get ripped from my reality into the cosmos? It happened here already once. The mystery just consumed the town to me, drenching it and leaving me constantly reminded of Eve, the girl that stopped existing. Days passed, and all I did was sit in the living room and watch TV. I enjoyed seeing my parents when they were around. They both worked, and this meant I spent a lot of time alone at the house, which I abhorred. Eventually I dug around. I dug through the old closet to find something that might be from first grade. I didn't find anything. I did, however, hold in my hands the picture that Eve was yanked from. The one where she should be between Elizabeth and Amy. But she isn't. She is not there. And she just natural space in between. Bastard universe. It's so smug, so omnipotent, that could leave clues as gaping as this. And yet still, there's just no way to prove she's real. But then on Christmas Eve, it happened. I got a text from Tyler. Scene, I read up on the Mandela effect. That shit got me fucked up. I think that is what happened. But I remember something now, and this might really prove Eve's existence for sure. The note I wrote to her. You stole it. You took it to Mrs. Davis' desk and gave it back to me. But then I told you to keep it and throw it away. You told me later on that you never threw it away, but took it home and showed it your parents, and laughed your ass off every time you read it. Where is it? If you still have it, it would be proof. Holy shit. I gasped when I read the text. Holy shit, you're completely right, Tyler. I'm going to find a note. I swear to God I will, and when I do, I send you pictures. Then we can prove she's real for sure. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Wouldn't the note not exist now too? Well, no. See, when the Mandela effect occurs, only things directly relating to what was changed are altered. That's why the people posing in front of the thinker are still posing wrong. That's why the cartoons in which King Tut's mask has one snake on it and no bird still look like that. The only thing changed is the real deal. So the actual pictures of Eve, they're gone. She'd been pulled from them, and there's no trace of her remaining that. But the note, if I find it, would be just the proof I needed. I wouldn't need to mention her name. My dad told me I could feel free to check the storage unit for the note. Apparently, there had been placed a lot of crap I didn't clean in my closet growing up, and if it was anywhere, it'd be there. I even faintly reminded stealing it now, like a running kid I was, and reading it from time to time for a good laugh. Some part of me wanted to wait until my dad got off work to check the storage with him. But I knew, somehow, that I'd never find the note if he was there. I felt like I had to do this alone. I drove there, through the snow one day, just as bleak and silent as any other in Towers. I passed the lone cornfield roads, the ominous, tower-like silos, the seemingly empty fish shops, and the frozen harbour. It was all just how it always was. When I got to the storage unit, I was strangely horrified. I felt like I was about to walk into a haunted house. As a kid, the storage unit always scared me. In all of my life, I know as a fact, I've never seen another soul in that building other than my father. It was always dark and empty, and now without him by my side. Searching for a letter about a ghost, I was mortified, but I continued on. I entered the frigid, formless metal halls, journeyed through them, and turning on the lights as I stepped into each corridor. Finally, I arrived at a unit, reached lifting the door. I made a frighteningly loud creak. It unsettled me to hear it, even though I was the only one making the noise. I lifted the door as quietly as possible, which wasn't quiet at all. Then began my hunt. I looked for over an hour. I could barely reach the boxes in the back, and one of them was filled to the brim with junk, usually supporting a silverfish or two. But then I found it, my baseball cards. They were for first grade. They were in a plastic container, visibly under the pile of junk which I resided. But I grabbed the box, sliding it out of the tomb under my arms. I opened the container. Inside there were baseball cards, a Berenstain Bray book, fucking creepy, and spelled with an A, of course, some doodles on a notebook, and a folded up letter. I recognized it instantly. I held up my hands, now in a lonely, cold, silent, eerie storage unit. I caressed the piece of evidence the universe forgot. I slit open the old paper, hardly able to breathe as I searched for the name. I unfolded it. Dear Eve. That was all I had to read. Dear Eve. Dear Eve. Dear Eve. I folded it up, I set it in my pocket. I took a long deep breath, leaning against a pile of dusty boxes. Eve was real. The girl that stopped existing was really here once in the graveyard of town. And I wasn't crazy. And somehow, some way, two universes collided. And Eve was ripped into oblivion by its silver fingers of the cosmos. Vacuumed from existence without a single trace. Except my memories, and Tyler's memories, and a note in my hand. What happened to her? Where was she now? Was she alive? Where was the sweet, quiet, summing girl? And would I ever know? Probably not. She's in a place where Curious George has a till, and where children grew up reading Berenstain Beers. She was taught that Nelson Mandela died in a South African prison, and when she pretends to be the thinker, she isn't posing wrong. I hope. Or maybe she's nothing now. Maybe the universe made a tragic mistake, and the harmless girl will never trudge into her mother's loving arms again, and instead spent eternity scared to death, trapped in the swirling grey snow. I've no idea, but as I sat there, all I could do was imagine the ghost of her sitting there with me. I felt so close to her in that place that time forgot. That meaningless metal room, trapped in a town in which the universe made a mistake. When I finally flew back to Tennessee, I couldn't be more relieved. I vowed that I would never return to Tower City, Michigan, no matter what the reason. As far as I was concerned, it was better left behind, like Eve was. But like usual, I just couldn't escape her. I texted pictures of the note to Asha and Tyler. Both were equally as messed up. We all just tried to put it behind us, though. And then Mrs. Davis updated her Facebook. "I'm sorry I couldn't make the reunion," she posted. "But I just want to say that I make the next one for sure, to my favorite class ever." She also published a picture, a drawing from Elizabeth. It was a drawing from class. It was clearly drawn by a child. Amateurish, simple, messy, and a colored pencil. But simple as it was, there was nothing normal about it. It was a drawing of 10 little boys and a drawing of 5 girls. A drawing of a short blonde girl with brown eyes. And that could only be distinguished as her dress. I don't know how anybody else reacted to that, but I know I never unsee that image. Even now, all the years later, sometimes she comes to mind. I can't help it. I've seen horrible, unexplainable things in my life. 2 towers destroyed by hijacked planes, and for no reason at all, other than sheer hatred, leaving thousands dead. A preschool invaded by an active shooter that employed military tactics, killing little children, and entirely unprovoked by anything. But none of it, affects me more than Eve, the girl the universe forgot. Thank you all so much for listening to tonight's story. Now I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my Patreons who helped make this channel possible. Thank you, Cool Scout 09 and Lady Nevermore, for all your help and support. You guys are amazing.